Hey there, internets. Back to my grandfather's desk. I am Pat. So, if you're new to the channel, you may have heard about recently. Welcome. Been at the fair the last few days promoting some initiatives. I'm going to try and go over those at a later date. A lot of good stuff, but I actually read them all. I think a couple of them need a little further explanation, but we're going to talk about something else. In the Democrats' latest Orwellian game, they decided to produce the Inflation Reduction Act, as they call it. And of course, it has nothing to do with inflation or reducing inflation. But they say it does, so it must, right? Or they're full of it. And they are full of it. Just some of the big picture stuff real quick. The increase in taxes, now historically, and you can go back all the way to 1930. I have a page here I will link to from the St. Louis Fed. Federal receipts as a percentage of GDP. It goes all the way back to 1929 when it was 3.7%, which is beginning of the Great Depression, and in 1944 it was 19%. 1940, let's find it here. 41 it was 6.5%, and then it starts soaring according to the St. Louis Fed. I've actually seen it a little higher earlier in some charts. And this goes up through 2021, but it averaged since then, no matter whether you had a top rate of 90% or 29%, it averaged about 17.5% of GDP, which is about where we're at right now in 2021, according to the St. Louis Fed. 17.59%, which is about average. Needless to say, when I Google searched what they're actually spending right now, currently, it's 23.5% of GDP. That's not sustainable, of course. Ultimately, all the inflation comes down to three things. Yes, we have the disruption, but deficit spending and printing money with fiat currency. You don't have those two things, you don't have inflationary problems, because there's not this constant pressure of people outbidding on commodities and every other service out there. Now their taxes, back to the big picture of this bill, equates out to 2.1% of GDP for next year and 2.26% of GDP with this additional tax enforcement they want to do. Later on, with the CBO's cost estimate, you actually see in the section label as off, it says memorandum not scored. They don't score, they only score based on current law. So if they add this enforcement, then they would start scoring. They assume that there's going to be a huge pile down the road of extra money pulled in over that 10 years to the tune of $203 billion. With tax increases, another $88.7 billion. And most of the tax increase in change of revenues, you see most of the tax increase happen right at the beginning. For fiscal year 2023, it would be over $44 billion. That actually equates out to, with the enforcement that's not scored, about 1.25% of GDP total with the enforcement is 2.26% of GDP in tax increases. And the enforcement in fiscal 2023, I didn't do the whole thing because they're, of course, scoring this over a 10-year period. And most of it, the first few years. The CBO, in a letter to Senator Graham, and has said it will have, which I will link to, and there is a comparison from the CBO to the Penn Wharton budget model from the University of Pennsylvania. They actually are more dim-viewed than the CBO as far as cost estimates. They estimate reduction in accumulated deficit, a lower reduction in accumulated deficits to the tune of $50 billion over that 10-year period. That's a 0.1% difference in the total of that. So they use different economic baselines in their assumptions. Ultimately, it doesn't fight inflation. Almost no difference right away, and a lot of this is just pushing Democratic priorities. So they include a bunch of subsidies, and they're going to try and do price controls, and price controls have always failed. Every single time. So they don't learn their lesson, but they want to have Medicare negotiate for what they call single source drugs, which is the stuff that's still under patent protection, where people are just trying to get their money back. So if they get a special deal for Medicare, it's going to push the cost of all that off onto somebody else. They also add some things such as, and there's a good, the bad, the ugly of energy from a website called Energy in Depth, which I used to just find stuff in this. I did not have time to read all 755 pages of this, so I had to find individual spots. And I thought when I first started reading it that the Medicare portion wasn't allowed by the Senate parliamentarian. But ultimately, you have an increase in the royalties for oil and natural gas extraction, starting out $900 per ton, a increase in methane, which is emissions, which is after a certain exemption, which is like 25,000 tons. You have an extra charge on that, which is going to drive up the bills. This website, and it is an energy website, so I'm not sure what its bias is, but energyindepth.org said it could result in a 17% increase in, and there's other increases, hidden increases. Let's see, where is it? Methane fee, which is going to be a tax. It's in section 60113, page 687, which, because it's a PDF, is actually a little further. It's $900 starting in 2024 and more in 2025 and topping out at $1,500. There is an estimate of 17% on average increase or more, $100 per year on the average American family that use natural gas. Now, I don't, but they're trying to push everything into electrical. So this could result in hidden taxes of, if your electricity is generated by natural gas, that's going to filter through, because no business ever just eats the cost of a tax. They're going to pass it on to you. That's why this 15% increase in corporate tax revenues not only gets passed on to the consumer, but in the letter to Senator Graham, it says it reduces the incentive to invest. Again, that hurts the economy. They couldn't say a lot when they wrote the letter to Senator Graham, which I will link to. Ultimately, every one of these taxes comes back to you, the consumer. So don't think we're just taxing those guys, those big corporations. You're taxing yourself, because it will ultimately, net after taxes is what investors care about. They don't care about the net before taxes. They care about the net after taxes. So consumers are going to get hit with that. It's also going to mean that, yes, some leases are back on the table. That's the good part. There is some good in it. But by increasing the royalty rates and increasing the minimum cost for the leases, ultimately those wells only become profitable when the price of oil gets higher, which means they're not going to be run if it's not justifiable. If oil gets too low in price, they'll just shut them off. Better to not pull it out than to lose money. It's no different than my employer not wanting to run my route on a Sunday because there's not enough packages to justify running my route on a Sunday. If he's going to just lose money, it's better that he say, Pat, I'm going to give you Sundays off and have you work a little longer on Monday. It makes more sense for him to do that because I don't put anything less than 100 miles on my truck every day. And diesel gets expensive. It's going to get more expensive in Washington with the carbon tax, their cap and trade scheme they passed in Olympia that we all rejected multiple times. So that's going to be on there. There is a bunch of money for enforcement, and Facebook did their fact check saying, oh, they're not hiring an army of new agents. They are increasing enforcement. Enforcement dropped the last 7 or 8 years, but you don't need that many to just go after the super rich. Sorry, guys, we're not buying that. There's only 600 and something billionaires in the United States. You don't need thousands of agents just to go after the billionaires. Or the millionaires and the billionaires, as Bernie Sanders likes to say, and he dropped the millionaires when he became a millionaire. I don't see him redistributing his house, but he's apparently earned it on your dime. But I digress. So this thing is full of stuff that's not even there. And the CBO says it's going to do somewhere between 0.1 of a percentage point reduction in inflation the first few years and even increase inflation. Later on, supposedly, they think it might do something more. But without output increasing to match the money available, prices are going to go up. That's just supply and demand. So that's a large portion of it. And, of course, linked to in there. But they've got loans, they've got subsidies for electrifying houses. Supposedly got some for trying to put solar panels on roofs. And, of course, all of this gets paid for by somebody. And it's not going to be paying for it for somebody else. It's all going to come back to the consumer. It does mention $2 billion to electrify and for electric and fuel cell vehicles. Well, at least they're trying to fuel cell now, because we know how electric vehicles do for range. But I'm not holding my breath. But the IRS breakdown is $45 billion for tax enforcement, $25 billion for operations. Now, why that needs to be in here? Same thing with there's money in there for national parks maintenance. How about we just keep it to one subject and actually what it's about? An Inflation Reduction Act, honestly, would be a reduction in spending. It would be getting government out of the way so businesses could more affordably produce products for us to match the spending that's already available. It could be not continuing to just print money. So maybe we should move back to a commodity-backed system. But that is what we got on there. 655 pages. It's all put together there, but ultimately, yeah, you might get a 1% of GDP increase in revenues, but of the 2% increase in revenues, you're going to burn up over half of it on increased spending. It's not going to be able to reduce spending enough to really bring in inflation. So this thing is an Orwellian pile of garbage. This is for all of you that have been voting left. You voted for Biden, you voted for Democrats in Congress. This thing will be completely ineffective, and it's going to manipulate the economy in economically inefficient ways. Because if all of this stuff for green energy were economically the best thing, we would already be going to it. It's not. So it's not going to help that. So, anyway, that's the long and short of it. Like I said, there's no Saturday night rant because I was helping out at the Skagit County Republican Fair booth. Saw a couple of friends. Hadn't seen in a long time. Some came by for the signed some of the initiatives. They were in a little packet of 11 different initiatives. I signed them all. I'm not going to let perfect be the enemy of good. Neither should you. I will try and do a breakdown at some point of all of them, but we're just trying to get them on the ballot, so it's going to be a lower priority for me. We want to get these, we got till December 19th to collect signatures. So if you see somebody with them, read them. They're not that hard to read. It's got restoring the ability of law enforcement to pursue criminals, criminalizing hard drugs. It's actually a reduction in gun control law. It just doesn't sound like it. I will have to get specific into that. About four tax cut initiatives, and some for good governance, one of which shouldn't even be a partisan issue. It's just a really good idea regarding the Electoral College. So, you guys all have a good night. Take care, and we'll see you later.